To Aylsham we go. John is waiting for us there. Morning, John.
Good morning.
What's your question for Mark and Steve, please?
I've got a Rubelia, or Rubina. It's about 35 feet high, and this year I had no leaves on the end of the branches, and the leaves that come didn't really mature. They got halfway and then they died off. Well, since then I've cut a branch off, and running up the stem is a black line in the branch, and also a piece of root, and that has got a black line running up it. I wonder whether it's got a disease in it.
Could I ask you a question first?
Yeah.
Is the soil fairly wet, or does it get fairly wet?
Yeah, it is in a wet place, yeah.
Right. Do you want to go first, Mark, or...?
You go, Steve.
Okay, right. Well, the thing is that acacias, they're native of places like Africa.
All right.
So they like really dry conditions. And there's been quite a few lost over the last 2 or 3 years, simply because of the wet summers that we've had and wet winters as well.
Right.
And quite often they can get diseases, soil-borne fungal diseases like verticillium and fusarium. And I think it's probably verticillium that they get when you get this black streak in them.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably don't want to hear this, but it sounds like your tree's heading for the great forest in the sky, mate.
Oh, I did prune it back about 2 years ago, cut it down, but I thought that might have something to do with whether it got disease in where I pruned it, like back.
Mark, do you want to add something?
Yeah, when a tree's under stress with a disease, sometimes pruning can just exacerbate the problem, because obviously the tree's then trying to respond to the pruning as well as the infections it's had. But it does sound like it's got a verticillium wilt. If it's a sort of black banding going up through the centre of the branches on the roots, that sounds like due to the wetness of the ground. So the best thing you can do is I say, get somebody to have a look at it and give you some advice with the tree, on site, invisible.
Okay then.
All right, John. Thank you for your call today, Steve.
Before you go, John, I would just say that I always recommend to anybody when they're taking a tree out, always consider before you get rid of it a replacement.
All right.
And whatever you choose, get something. And there are now resistant forms of elm and certainly hornbeam. I think they're good for wet conditions, aren't they, Mark?
Yeah, hornbeam.
Avoid acers because they're very prone to verticillium. We're suggesting that that's in the soil anyway, so if you planted any form of acer, you would almost certainly lose that within 5 years.
Oh, so this tree is actually a form of acer, is it?
No, it's not a form of acer, but there are certain diseases that tend to, if you like, prefer a diet of certain trees, and it just so happens that verticillium, and to a certain extent fusarium, it will get both acacias and it will get acers, whereas if you planted something like an elm or hornbeam, where they can, and lime to a certain extent, they will cope with wetter soils. They will give you the effect that you want without being vulnerable to these diseases that we think are in your soil.
John, thank you for your call today. Mark, this is an email from Margaret, who's in Pegwell. She's off to collect her KCC free tree this afternoon. She's asked for a crab apple to replace a buddleia in her garden. She says, I might be jumping the gun and asking advice on planting it until I see it. Obviously, I have no idea as to how big the tree is or how big it will be. Steve's already mentioned this morning that the ground is so wet at the moment. She says, I want to just pop it into a large pot until 3 o'clock next Saturday. Is that okay to do? And what advice, please, on actually planting the tree?
Yeah, it's fine. If it's bare root stock, then it would need to go into either a big pot, or you can heal it in. If you could make a raised bed that's out of the moisture level, you could put it in there temporarily until the conditions improve. So I hope that answers the temporary planting situation. With regard to planting it when you've actually decided where you want to plant it, I would make sure you dig a really nice hole, not just the size that the bag of the rootstock that comes with the tree, but a bit bigger to give the soil a bit of break up to allow all the nutrients to get in there. Use a stake. I think earlier this morning Steve was mentioning the size of stakes. You want a small stake that holds the tree and the root in place, but not actually stops the stem from moving, which promotes structural wood growth. So yeah, you need to just find a nice spot for it. Make sure there's no weeds in there. You could use a mulch on top of the planting area to keep the soil moist, but also to promote warmth, which promotes root growth and keeps the competition from the weeds away. All right, Margaret, that's the advice for you. Thank you. Mark is in Tenham this morning. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
What can we do for you?
I've got a calamundan orange tree. Got it from the Eden Project. we've been feeding it with the actual feed that comes with it, and
Yeah.
it's losing all its leaves. We've got oranges actually on it,
Yeah.
but we're losing all its leaves. I wonder if you can help us tell what we can do, or advise us to do with it.
Steve.
Right. The calamondin is a type of orange. Well, it looks like a cross between. To look at the size of the fruit, it looks like a cross between an orange and tangerine, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, to give you some idea, all of these citrus plants, they tend to grow really well in places like California, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, where the light levels are really good. I would stop feeding it at this time of year. If you can, have it somewhere as light as possible, but don't be surprised at all if it sheds all of its leaves, because it's to do with the light level rather than to do with what you're feeding it with.
Right.
In the right conditions, they will be evergreen. If the light level is lower, they will shed the leaves. And what I would suggest, if it sheds its leaves, just cut right down on the watering, just keep it on tick over. And then in the spring, if you take each of the branches back by about a third, don't cut them back too far, because one of the problems with citrus is that they don't have the capacity to store much food in the wood at all. And of course, if you prune it back and it's got no reserves, it ain't going to grow again.
Right, okay.
But if it loses its leaves, yes, it's going to look a bit odd. In fact, it's going to look almost like a Christmas decoration if it's just got the fruit on and branches. Yeah. But it's not the end of the world. As the light levels improve in the spring, it should come back.
Right, okay.
All right, Mike.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I couldn't think of anything worse than swinging about on ropes up a tall tree. Mark's just laughing at me. Thinks I'm a big girl's blouse, quite clearly. How high do you go sometimes?
As high as we need.
All right. So 60 foot is probably just off the ground to you, is it?
Yeah, that's
all right. Well, Jeff in Maidstone's got a 60-footer that he wants dealing with. Hello, Jeff.
Hello there.
Tell us a little
Jeff.
bit about the tree, please.
Yes, right. It's about 60 foot, I should say, at least, and it's got about a 30-foot spread on it. It divides at 10 feet and goes up in two main limbs, and about two-thirds of the way up, they each have more or less a crown.
And this is a eucalyptus, Jeff,
Yes,
is that right?
Yes, it is a eucalyptus, yeah. And I'd like to lower it, really, because, well, for various reasons, it's taken over a lot of light. It's not causing any problems to buildings or anything. And the tree is in the right position for me to shield adjoining properties and that.
Okay. It sounds like a very nice tree.
Yes, it is. I feel disappointed perhaps at cutting it, and that's why I'm ringing you, really.
Okay, well, with the sort of height reduction you're talking about, what you're going to end up doing is basically doing a pollard.
Yes,
because you're going to cut beyond the sort of recommended 1/3 of the original branch, etc.,
yes,
etc.
Yes.
But by cutting down to a pollard, you could create an open framework, which then would produce very vigorous new shoots, which would then screen off your buildings opposite. So it is a method you could do. The tree would look pretty bare to start with, but believe you me, once eucalyptus gets going, it goes. And you've got that lovely, fragrant, luxurious growth that, you know, if you're interested in flower arranging, any local florist, they love eucalyptus flowers as well as the leaves.
So there's no great downside to the tree in doing it, either visually or for damage to the tree.
Not really, no. I mean, it will look different. That's the thing, and people have got to accept that management of trees sometimes means quite serious pruning. But if you're trying to get it to a smaller, more manageable height, have you got space for it to grow?
Yes, there's no problem with it, the size that it is, really, other than that it does seem to be got quite dominant, and in these high winds, I'm a little bit concerned about it.
Okay. Well, the best time to prune it, really, if you want to get a quick regrowth, would be once the leaves are back in the spring next year, and it's a really aggressive phase then, because once you cut it, the dormant buds in the stems will then appear and you'd get some new growth.
Oh, that's great. Okay, fine. That's very helpful.